We have to tell the truth, General, about what happened over there. The whole hard, cold truth.
Everybody knew, from the engineering team. I mean, I spoke to every single one of them, all the children that were coming in straight out of university. Some hadn't even been to university yet, that Tony Nissen had employed. Stockton had no experience building submersible. None of them did. None of them were experienced submersible operators. I know the company had been on the go since 2009. There was no experience across the board within that organisation. That initially was the entire appeal for me going across and transforming things and making something good out of what at the time was nothing. It was nothing. It was all smoke and mirrors, all the social media that you see about all these past expeditions. They always had issues with their expeditions.
In the US Coast Guard hearing that has recently concluded, David Lockridge comes across as the likable but reluctant hero, the Scotty of the Titan submersible, and the foil of the recalcitrant Stockton Rush.
But I'll not lower my defences on the word of that mealy-mouthed gentleman down below.
I was told everything was going to be getting done in-house with Tony Nissen and his team, who I had no confidence in whatsoever, and I seriously voiced my concerns to senior management. That was the Chief Operating Officer, Neil McCurdy, to Stockton Rush, the CEO. I was never happy with any of the decisions that were potentially going into this project. That was pre- and post-manufacture of what was getting done. I was phased out completely.
And why do you believe you were phased out?
Because I embarrassed the CEO.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this analysis, I'm highlighting the 10 biggest what the F moments from the Coast Guard hearing. Most of them are from the hearing. There are one or two things that the hearing didn't quite touch on. And I do think the reason Lockridge stands out, why he's so likable, why he's such an asset to this whole process, is he's one of the few straight shooters in this whole story where everyone else is playing narrative dodgems and seemingly still drunk on the Kool-Aid more than a year later. Just think how different Lockridge is to Stockton. Stockton was a lot more obtuse, and this is likely why they butted heads the way they did. One really has the impression after dealing with the likes of Lockridge and other educated men, Stockton elected to surround himself with junior yes men, and the result was he put OceanGate on a yellow brick road to disaster and catastrophe. Before we get to those 10 what the Fs, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So, number 1, Renata shouted at Stockton, "Give him the effing controller."
She shouted at Stockton to give me the effing controller. She had tears in her eyes. He reached round behind him. I had my head up inside the tower, so I'm still looking at the wreck, and he clattered it off the right side of my head. The controller landed on the deck plate. One of the buttons came off, the robust PlayStation controller. And I picked it up, repaired it, and had us out 10-15 minutes.
Now, I've listed this as the first what the F for quite a few reasons. It's not just giving an insight into Stockton Rush's petulance, just what a childish, spoiled person he was, what a petty human being he appeared to be, but also how he was treating one of his own employees just with the utter contempt. And then at the same time, how someone who was with him would then come back from that trip and tell a totally different story. So, probably the biggest fangirl we've heard during the entire hearing was Renata Rojas. In Lockridge's version of events, the subs got stuck during the first dive down to the Andrea Doria, but the what the F isn't so much what Renata supposedly said to her Captain Kirk, right? She denied this, by the way. She denied Lockridge's story. And that's where you've also got to ask, well, if Lockridge is a straight shooter, is Renata as well?
I did see David Lockridge's account of the events, and he must have gone on a different dive. Nobody was panicking, nobody was crying, and there was definitely no swearing and yelling.
Do you know, you said Mr. Lockridge took the controls. Do you know if Mr. Rush, since he was the pilot on that, correct, going down, do you know why he had to take the controls?
Lockridge or David?
Well, Mr. Lockridge.
I don't know why he had to take the controls. He kept asking.
Well, she didn't know why he had to take the controls. And of course, she doesn't mention anything about the controls being thrown. But I think even more than this, one gets a real sense, a real raw sense of Captain Kirk Stockton being emasculated, embarrassed, and humiliated. This is at least according to Scotty's version. You know, when this controller was hurled at Lockridge's head. You know, that is how he deals with being embarrassed, I guess, because he's such an important person. He's the most important person in this of his generation, I guess. That brings us to number 2, Renata Rojas defending the important role of mission specialists / citizen scientists.
And you still allow citizen scientists to participate in expeditions. Expeditions are needed, and the oceans are significantly underfunded. Private citizens are the ones funding the expeditions, and I hope that doesn't stop.
Somehow I think this is the root of the problem with OceanGate and with Titan. It's things like being emotional, being sentimental, being nostalgic or something like that. And Titanic represents a kind of nostalgia for some other time where we were proving our preeminence over nature with our machines. And that was kind of obvious at that time. People were also categorized a lot more clearly into classes of wealth and privilege than they are today, where that sort of thing is no longer politically correct. What did you think of Renata Rojas's closing remarks that exploration is a risk and we need to take risks in the name of scientific exploration? What we're talking about here is what some people regard as a tourist attraction, others see it as a massive graveyard, while others still see it as their pet science project. Who is anyone to say what Titanic is supposed to mean to them? To me, it's a cautionary tale about hubris, but it seems that lesson went completely over so many heads in the story. So Stockton Rush wasn't the only person in the story suffering from delusions of grandeur, was he? Renata Rojas was just the most vocal of the so-called mission specialist, ticket-paying tourists who believed that their work actually meant anything. I'm sure it meant a lot to her personally. I mean, if Stockton thought he was Captain Kirk, maybe she was Uhura.
Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
Get up to your post. Run today's communication from Starfleet Command. I want to know my exact orders and options, if any.
I think in order to understand what is really going on with Stockton Rush, one can really look at Renata, and the same way that she's driven in a way by her family and by her father and by her links to the Titanic. It's actually kind of an emotional journey. I think a lot of what was driving Stockton was also emotional. Ego as well, but clearly he was an emotional fellow. And that was the problem here. You needed science, clear thinking, logic, and less emotion. And also less greed. Think about how that addled this whole narrative. Because one man or woman's tourist becomes another's scientific explorer if you drink enough of the Kool-Aid. Number 3, Titan had a toilet. Quite a few of Stockton Rush's cheapskate designs have tended to hog the public's imagination, especially the game controller, also the Home Depot crate used as an air filter and all the rest. But many have overlooked the craziest amenity aboard the Titan, a toilet situated right beside the window. And now, what the F number 4, serious platform malfunction on June 12th. Just 6 days before the implosion that killed 5 passengers, OceanGate found themselves desperately trying to extricate themselves from a different disaster. According to CNN, quote, Stephen Ross, a marine scientist and crew member of Dive 87 on the Titan's 4th mission in 2023. Bear in mind the fatal mission was the 5th mission, the last mission, the next mission after this mission. Well, he testified at a hearing Thursday on the vessel's tragic implosion about a platform malfunction during that dive that caused all 5 people on board to slam to the aft of the submersible for at least an hour. So just think about this. The dive prior to the implosion where 5 people die, all 5 people on board are slamming inside the submersible for an hour. And then you say after that incident, okay, well, let's dive down to the Titanic. You know, we sorted everything out. There are no problems here. We know how to deal with eventualities. Going back to the article, the dive was aborted because upon resurfacing, a platform malfunction caused by an issue with the variable ballast tank, which controlled the submersible's buoyancy, caused the platform to invert to 45 degrees with the back bow facing upward. Now, if you're reading the tea leaves here, if the far sturdier platform has been damaged, what are the chances the fragile thing locked onto it, attached to it? What are the odds that that hasn't been damaged as well? Going back to the article, the pilot crashed into the rear bulkhead. The rest of the passengers tumbled about. I ended up standing on the rear bulkhead. One passenger was hanging upside down, and the other 2 managed to wedge themselves into the bow end cap. And then you've kind of got to say, after that, you have an implosion where everybody dies. I mean, you can see just how things were unraveling, can't you? Most people could see that. So think about it. It's not enough to have a flawed design and weak materials holding it together. The craft itself is allowed to be battered and bruised for days on end on the open sea. And then on top of that, after that, apparently not checked or inspected. Even crazier, it gets even worse than this. We also know the Titan was parked for 6 months at a time with no shelter of any sort outside in a parking lot. Essentially meant to weather a Canadian winter. You know, we're talking about Newfoundland. This alone shows the level of neglect and the disconnect from reality that we're dealing with. This is the attitude even the owners of the submersible had to the submersible itself. Would you do that with a car? Number 5, Guillermo Sonhein's testimony. Now, one could easily come up with 10 what the F's regarding the co-founder's statements. But for me, what was the most unbelievable was him seemingly advertising his Venus initiative while essentially on trial. You know, he was standing up with these pictures of Venus right behind him. And, you know, he's essentially on trial, maybe not on trial, he's at a hearing, and it's all about, the context of it is about a huge failure in another of his ventures, but that's okay. Let's go on to the next one, which is arguably even more far-fetched. Number 6, the skull and crossbones. Turned out to be accurate, didn't it? Number 7, Carl Stanley on Lightning Gate. Did lightning really ever strike the Titan? Or was that an urban legend? Was that a contrivance? Because what emerges through the narrative is this talk about weather being the real issue, when wasn't it something else? Wasn't it a flawed vessel, a poorly constructed vessel? What Lockridge described in his testimony was smoke and mirrors surrounding what was really going on. So was Lightning Gate part of the smoke and mirrors? Carl Stanley was one of only a few submarine operators, you know, that's geared towards tourists that seem to really understand what should have been going on. And he was one of the few people besides Lockridge that seemed to hold Stockton accountable, certainly in his emails. And he actually stayed in the same house as Stockton in the Bahamas when they were doing these dives. Did he see a lightning strike? But I think the biggest what the F for Stanley was that while he knew about it, Stockton never admitted to him that they found a crack in the carbon fiber hull. Holding that back is huge. Number 8, Titan debris on the ocean floor showed that the hull encountered a significant amount of delamination. Now, for me, in a sense, this is one of the biggest what the Fs of all, because I can't help looking at that and kind of going, do people not understand the English language? Do people not understand what words mean? When people look at pictures, can they not see what is patently obvious right in front of them? I mean, they say a picture says 1,000 words. So when we're talking about delamination, this is, of course, a reference to the carbon fiber.
Afterwards, here we see the response for dive 80 and its spike in acoustic activity after returning to the surface. Looking at dive 81, there was an increase in acoustic activity during the descent, and once again an increase in activity after returning to the surface. Dives 82 and 83 show a trend of the hull becoming quieter with successive dives, as seen here for dive 82. Next slide. And here for dive 83.
One of the experts at the hearing, Kramer, said that the Titan debris on the ocean floor showed the hull encountered a significant amount of delamination, which means separating into layers, most of which was within or adjacent to co-bonded adhesive interfaces. Can I ask you a question? Do you know what delamination means? It means breaking. It means splitting apart. What do you think significant delamination means? So we are dealing with concentric layers of carbon fiber glued to other concentric layers of carbon fiber in a scenario of extreme and highly variable pressure. What could go wrong? Number 9, the glue is to blame. First of all, let me acknowledge that I could be wrong about this one. I'm not an engineer, and my brother actually is, but the official report, the official finding isn't out yet. But logically, blaming the glue at this point in the investigation seems like going to the ends of the earth to dodge the finger of blame. Now, I'm not surprised that someone from OceanGate would blame something else for the failure besides the experimental design and the experimental material, carbon fiber. OceanGate contractor Tim Caddison basically defended the craft while blaming the adhesive.
And that the failure happened at the forward glue line at the ring. This is, you probably already, I mean, I know Tom already has a fair idea about, what I think about this, but if it hasn't been said, it is now. That this is how I think the failure happened, is why that glue line failed, cyclic fatigue of the glue.
And I think this approach is because he's invested in the concept himself. And so to acknowledge flaws and weaknesses in this area, in his own concept, would be to shoot his own expertise in the foot. But the part that surprised me was how receptive so many people were to believing this. I got so many comments about, this is the reason this happened. It's the glue, in comments on my own channel, because someone from OceanGate said that. At the crushing depth Titan was when it imploded, the pressure, if anything, was doing the adhesive's job for it. It was pushing the ends towards each other against the central carbon fiber cylinder. So it wasn't becoming unstuck, it was becoming fused together. So to say that that's the part that failed is to me once again a complete failure of imagination, shows a complete misunderstanding of how pressure works on deep sea pressure vessels. That's my opinion. But let me get this straight. So the failure happens in a horizontal direction at the circular end because of horizontal tension at extreme depth, rather than for the most blindingly obvious reason, a colossal amount of vertical pressure weighing down on a too stretched out vehicle, weighing down especially on the center of that too stretched out vehicle, which is built with weak, brittle, inelastic carbon fiber holding it together. But you still want to blame the glue.
And that the failure happened at the forward glue line.
So let me get this straight. There's nothing wrong with using carbon fiber, and you should use carbon fiber again, and you should continue using this sausage-shaped design. And that's the lesson we learn out of this incident. Just change the glue. Number 10, all good here. We know now that a fake transcript was invented and misrepresented online in the months leading up to the hearings. I want to see, we're talking about being honest, not drinking the Kool-Aid. I want you to be honest now. I want you to be honest. I want you to let me know in the comments if you were one of those who thought that the transcript was real and perhaps passed it on to others. Were you thinking critically about that transcript? It's probably also worth asking, how did I know that that transcript was fake? How did I know? How did I know and perhaps somebody else didn't know? What do you think the answer is to that? Like, how can one person look at something without the benefit of hindsight, without the benefit of a hearing, and be able to discern that it's not genuine? How? Like, how does that happen? We also know that the all good here wasn't the final message from the submersible, and yet I think all good here is a fitting epitaph for the story. That was Stockton's mantra, kind of his motto throughout his doomed project. And in spite of everything, that was the social media message broadcast by OceanGate. All good here. What the hearings revealed was just how systemic the issues actually were, and Lockridge in particular described the submersible as an abomination and one he would never trust. In essence, all bad here. The all good here attitude is why Titan failed, and failed as spectacularly as it did. The all good here attitude is why Titanic failed, and failed as spectacularly as it did. This is why we have to beware and be wary of all good here people. And even when you are looking on YouTube and watching and being fascinated by a transcript that isn't real, you are also in the all good here mindset where you say, yeah, no, I trust this source. I think everything is fine. This is legitimate entertainment, or this is legitimate analysis. All good here. Nothing is ever all good. Things that are too good to be true, too easily found or delivered, often are too good to be true. And it takes critical thinking, not Kool-Aid, to tell the difference.
I think in order to honor a soldier like Karen Walden, we have to tell the truth, General. My full report, General.
Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.